A very good morning to all our esteemed fellows, our young associates, and other invitees of the first of the INA webinar series. I, Lieutenant Colonel Shobhit Rai, Deputy Executive Director INA, shall be conducting the today's session. Firstly, a small brief about our today's speakers. The first speaker of the day, as you can see on the screen, is Mr. K. Ananthakrishnan. He is the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Tata Consultancy Services, and he leads R&D and innovation at TCS and chairs the TCS Corporate Technology Board. A member of the TCS Corporate Think Tank since 1999, he has been a principal architect and lead consultant in TCS Architecture and Technology Consulting Practice. He has been a member of several advisory boards of software companies, industry boards, bodies, and government committees. Mr. Anand also served on the organizing committees of several national and international conferences and has been named Computer World's premier 100 IT leaders and InfoWorld's top 25 CTOs. Mr. Anant Krishnan is the chairman of INA Digital Committee also. It is under his watch the ambitious INA digital platform is finding roots. Now, without further ado, I invite Mr. Anant Krishnan to please deliver the inaugural address for the INA webinar series.
Thank you, Colonel. My privilege to deliver the inaugural address at the launch of the INA webinar series in the midst of this global crisis. And in doing so, I take the opportunity to introduce everybody to the INA digital platform itself. Colonel, if we can move to the next slide, please. The digital platform has a long history. The INA Governing Council had taken a view in 2000, but to have a very strong view of digitization of many INA functions with all our stakeholders, including the fellowship. So in February 2018, a digital platform committee was formed under the chairmanship of Dr. Pradeep, Vice President INA, and myself, Manish Gupta, Hema Murthy, Sriram Rajamani, Priti Ramamritam, and Vinay Kulkarni were co-opted into the committee to guide this vision into a more concrete plan. To cut a long story short, we went through a fairly detailed process of requirements, consultations with the fellowship, consultations with the INA leadership, the governing council. And in December 2018, we launched the first phase of the digital platform, which was the website on a much stronger technology footing. And a first set of applications which would digitize the functioning of many aspects of the academy. From then onwards, for the last more than a year now, year and a half nearly, the work of that initial committee has morphed into a review committee, the digital committee that I am chairing. And myself, Dr. Pradeep, Vinay Kulkarni, Dr. Ghosh, and previously the late Dr. Brigadier Rajan Minocha, Executive Director, now Colonel Shobhit Rai, have been regularly working with both our implementation partner, New Concept Information Systems, NCIS from Delhi, and the INA team led very ably by Dr. Debjani to get this vision into a reality. Now, what is this reality? Now, next slide, please. Today, the website is the most visible part of INA's external stakeholder interaction. And this is now, as I said earlier, launched in December 2018 itself. It's on relatively very modern technology. The open source WordPress platform is very flexible, very powerful. It allows us many new things that we could not do on the previous technology generation that we were on before this was launched. And it has many, other than informational functions, it has many functions which are related to the interactions with our external stakeholders. So it is not just a pretty face of the academy, but also a place where the academy actually transacts and interacts with its external stakeholders. And you'd also notice that there is strong social media integration as well, which we did not have in a significant way before. On the next slide, you will see what exactly are the new features that we have put in a lot of effort, and now everybody is, I'm sure, fairly happy with the results. The functionality is, of course, very rich, and we are beginning to exploit many of them for the look and feel part of it on the left side, as you can see, improved navigation and social media integration, search, quick links, and so on. But also on the bottom right, you see some of the functions that external stakeholders can now start using on the website itself. So online nominations for INA schemes and awards, for example, or the INA expert pool, which is used by agencies like the DST in India to reach out to fellows who have put their profiles on the expert pool, and so on. So there is a bit of course, show and tell, but also a lot of the engagement part has been put on the public face of the website. But that is not all. On the next slide, there is a lot of detail that we have worked through on the functionality for the fellowship itself. In the annual convention in 2018, I had demonstrated the first cut of the fellow dashboard. I really welcome each of you to create your own profiles on this. This is private for the fellows, and I'll show you a little bit more detail of what all can be done in this particular page. But more importantly, while your profile is your articulation of your achievements, your areas of specialization, your work to the rest of the fellowship, you see on the bottom right the dashboard that is actually your path into many things that we as fellows need to do for each other and for the academy as well. And that is the rich functionality that is now available in large part to all of us. The webinar request and hosting and conduct is one of these functions, which is today's outcome. While today we have done it as a launch, in future, any fellow would be able to use the webinar request capability and set up a webinar with help from the INA Secretariat, announce it to the fellowship, and then, of course, share the knowledge and archive it later for further usage by people who could not actually attend that. So let me drill down on the next slide into the actual functions which are available for fellows only. And then we'll get into the functionality modules in a little more detail. So this is the fellows only functionality, which is, of course, with a secured login, unique username and password. I'm sure all of you have used it to register for this webinar itself. The interactive dashboard, as I've said, many functions that we do, which is online nominations, et cetera, for awards, for fellowships, for schemes. I mentioned the request to conduct a webinar, the travel requisition, searching for other fellows, and so on. The important aspect is that the profile that we create has a public and private flag on it. So you might choose to keep all the information that you have created in your profile page private, which means that it will not be shared outside of the fellowship. Anybody who has to view that profile will have to come into the fellowship login, and then only they will be able to access, search for you, etc., etc. If you choose to make even a section of your profile public, then we will pick it up and integrate it with the external facing, what we saw in the home page, the expert pool. That bridging is the intent. Today it is in progress, and as more and more fellows choose to make their profiles public, we will actually institutionalize that as we move forward. On the next slide, you will see the 22. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so there are 22 digital modules which are part of the INAE digital platform. Many on the left side are already I've already talked about. There are facilities on the website itself. There are facilities on the website for open domain for access to anybody, like the travel grant or the student projects award, etc., etc. And then the fellow functionality is available on the right side. This will be things that we as fellows will use. I'm happy to report many of these have been used. May I request all participants to mute, please? We'll take your questions at the end of Vinay's address, so please be patient. The fellow functionality has been launched, and many nominations, for example, for the INAE fellowship, for the various awards and so on, have taken in for the first time this year, and we will improve it as we go forward. The items in red, there are about 8 items which are in progress. 2 of them are on hold because the requirements are still coming in from the respective INAE stakeholders. But the other 6 will be launched in the next few weeks and months. Diligently, INAE Secretariat, the Digital Committee, and our partner NCIS are working on these. So that is the summary of the overall digital platform, and we hope that this will be an asset that the fellowship will use very frequently, very significantly. We are seeing a lot of efficiencies in this already. The governing council has been using the same platform that we are using today for its meetings because of the crisis. Travel and other things have not been possible, so that is already used. I'm told that many sectional committees are actually using it as well for their functioning, and so that is, of course, a good immediate benefit. But in the longer term, I think this digital interaction will give us many more options. Can we move to the next slide, please? So now I've come to the webinar series itself. As you saw on the opening slide, today is the first webinar, and we have the privilege of listening to my colleague from TCS, Vinay Kulkarni, FNAE, talk about his work. And we hope that this will be a very strong start to the vision of the INAE webinar series. It creates a platform to enable us as INAE fellows for sharing what we are doing in different disciplines of engineering. We will be able to also host events on this platform. We will take that a step at a time. Today, we have opened up this webinar to invitees that fellows have invited. The invitations have gone to fellows and young engineers. But we will also subject to a limit, I think, of 200 attendees per webinar. So this will benefit young engineers, other stakeholders to participate as well. All right. So the technical details, of course, the webinar is hosted on the WebEx platform, which is very robust, and we plan to host a webinar at the right frequency. And I'm glad to see that already there is a bit of a pipeline of webinar topics being built up. I got a mail from Dr. Kotwal this morning, which will be announced formally at the end of this webinar by Colonel Rai. So I really encourage the fellowship to use this platform. A lot of effort has gone into building it. Today, I'm sure we'll have a great session by Vinay. And I really look forward to your active participation and feedback. Thank you very much. Back to you, Colonel Rai.
A big thank you to Mr. Ananthakrishnan for dedicating the webinar series to the INAE Fellowship. Now, coming to our esteemed speaker, who's next, that is Mr. Vinay Kulkarni. I'll just brief you about his accomplishments. Mr. Vinay Kulkarni is the Chief Scientist and Head of Software Systems and Services Research at Tata Consultancy Services. His research interests include learning native software systems, multi-agent systems, model-driven software engineering, and enterprise modeling. At present, he is focused on exploring feasibility of future-proofing enterprises with modeling, simulation, and analytics. His prior work is focused on making software development and engineering endeavor. During the course of his career, he has led development of automation tools and methods using model-based techniques that are used by the industry for past 20 years. Much of this work has found its way into international standards, 3 of which Vinay contributed to in a leadership role. His work, which is being presented today, has also received fair mention in respective international print media. An alumnus of IIT Madras, Vinay also serves as visiting professor of Middlesex University, London. Now, over to Mr. Vinay for his presentation, please.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Delighted and honored to give the first webinar of INI webinar series. So over here, I'm going to talk about my ongoing work, which started about 5-6 years ago. It's on enterprise digital twins. Now, this is a space which is rather new. Not many industrial research labs are onto it. So I thought it would be best to characterize this talk more as how TCS has been viewing enterprise digital twins and what TCS has done with enterprise digital twins. Okay, so this talk has a very strong TCS flavor because it's still a very new. So typically, those of you who are conversant with enterprise modeling will see this slide as fairly straightforward. Generally, the enterprise is viewed along these 3 planes. The topmost is the plane of purposes, intentions, etc., because all enterprises are purposive entities and they define their purposes, which then get crystalled down into. So the topmost plane is this plane of the purposes, which generally gets crystalled down into what goes on as a goal decomposition structure, wherein you further subdivide the goals and also identify relationships between these goals, the dependence as well as crosscuts, if any. If you try to achieve a particular goal, some other goal you need to let go, etc., etc. So that's the topmost plane, and in order to, once it has been decided what the purpose is, what the goals are, and how we are going to measure ourselves, then comes the next plane, wherein we define the organizational structure, roles and responsibilities, operational processes, so as to achieve the stated objectives. And in this world of high pervasiveness of computing in all aspects of life, enterprises are also using the software systems, IT systems very heavily, so as to automate these operational processes to the extent possible. Now, that's what a typical enterprise is. Now, if we take an exogenous or an outside-in view of enterprise as a system, then this is what it is. It can be viewed as input-output transfer function. Most of the control theoreticians will be very comfortable with this articulation. And that system exists or operates in an environment which about which the system makes certain assumptions, and those assumptions get encoded into the operation of the systems, which if you go back through the previous slide, which means that it impacts the roles, responsibilities, organizational structure, operational processes, the software system that are being used to support those operational processes, so on and so forth. And the environment also constrains the input which the system would be accepting, and the system produces certain output which essentially can be seen as a set of KPIs, and goals are nothing but an objective function over these KPIs. Could be quantitative, could be qualitative. So that's the high level outside in view of enterprise as a system. And along similar lines, one can now define endogenous views, inside out views for the systems layer, processes layer, so on and so forth. And one of the key challenges faced is how do we keep these three views internally consistent with each other. Now, enterprise is not a static entity. It operates in a dynamic environment. So the environment could change. As a result, the input could change, and even the goals could change for external reasons. And for these changes in the environment, goals, and inputs, the enterprise now needs to come up with an adaptive response by making suitable changes in its operational processes layer, systems layers, so on and so forth. So today, the current industry practice goes about addressing this arriving at a response problem in broadly three approaches. First approach relies solely on analytical techniques, wherein it is expected that the overall behavior of the enterprise is available, and it is available to a suitably high degree of specificity so that it can be expressed in using mathematical terms, onto which mathematical techniques like linear programming, etc., can be used, having posited the problem as optimization problem. Now, these techniques work really well when the information available is full, there is no uncertainty, and the system is such that its behavior is indeed specifiable. So the kind of systems which we are talking about, unfortunately, don't lend themselves very easily to be specified in purely mathematical terms. There are, of course, parts of the system that can be so specified, but not the whole of the system. And moreover, nobody really knows what is the overall behavior of a system. Like, for example, if we look TCS as a system, and if one has to state what is the overall behavior of a system, it's very hard because one knows such large systems only in pockets, and these pockets or parts interact with each other, and the overall system behavior emerges from these interactions. It is never known, never available a priori, and hence analytic techniques per se can't be used. The second approach is of using past data, wherein the focus is, okay, the system has behaved so in the past, so those are the manifest of the possible behaviors of the system. Let me learn a model from that past data and use that model for predictive analysis. In good old days, it used to be called the statistical pattern matching. The en vogue term these days is machine learning. So you have lots and lots of data of the past, you machine learn to model and use that model for future predictive analysis, which is a great approach, but has two vulnerabilities. The model which you have learned is going to represent only those behaviors that have manifest, which is a subset of all possible behaviors, and therefore the inferences derivable from such a model are going to be at best suboptimal. And there is a big proviso over here that we are expecting the future to be a linearized extrapolation of the past. Then this approach will work really well, but there is no guarantee that future will be a linearized extrapolation of the past. So machine learning techniques relying solely on past data are useful, but not always. Therefore, the industry practice as a result falls back on human expertise, who know part of the overall system really well, or all enterprise really well, and they are able to come up with really good responses for a particular change for that particular part. But the trouble is, if you ask an expert, how did you really arrive at that response, kind of give a justification, quantitative, experts find it very difficult to give such a justification. And B, because experts have a localized view of the overall system, their response could be locally optimal, but the ramifications of that response throughout the system, the expert is not really aware of, or he can't even say anything about it. So as a result, the overall decision making ends up being largely ad hoc. So as a result, it can be said that the current practice of enterprise decision making could do with some improvements. So to address that space, we have come up with an approach which essentially builds further upon established research in the fields of modeling and simulation, artificial intelligence, and control theory. From the field of modeling and simulation, we borrow the idea of a digital twin, which can glibly be stated as a virtual high-fidelity representation of a complex system that is amenable to quantitative analysis through what if and if what, forward and backward scenario playing. From the field of artificial intelligence, we pick the concept of reinforcement learning, which essentially says that if you let a particular agent interact with the environment onto which certain events are taking place, then eventually the agent will learn what is the right course of action, what to do when, so as that particular action has a maximal reward. And with this as a primordial technique, one can now learn policies which are expressed, which are actually expressions of your desired objectives. So that's the learning aspect. But these two things need to come together. So for that, we learn, we pick from the control theory the concept of model reference adaptive control, which is kind of a dynamic adaptation technique, wherein for our purpose, we treat enterprise as the system that needs to be controlled. Model of that system is the digital twin, and the controller and sense-making machinery is the reinforcement learning agent. So fine, if that is how it is going to be the case, then first of all, you need a language to specify your digital twin. So for that, we have developed a language which essentially based on actor model of computation. Now, I won't go too much into the mumbo jumbo of computer science over here, but think of actors as an abstraction which allows you to model a system as a set of actors, set of purposive autonomous actors which are exchanging information with each other. And those of you who are conversant with object orientation, think of actor as an object on steroids. So just like an object, an actor has a state which comprises of the various attributes, and it has a behavior. The behavior means actor is listening to things that are taking place in its environment, or somebody is sending a message to it, and it acts on that message if a certain condition exists or is fulfilled. And that action could be one of the following four. Now, this event condition action paradigm is a well-studied paradigm in distributed systems, and that's what we use. Our contribution to the field is making this event condition action paradigm probabilistics, because we need to deal with uncertainty, and hence we introduce probability. Now, either this probability distribution of with what probability a particular action needs to be taken can be a priori known, or it could be learned using machine learning techniques. And the actions that are possible are, you either change the value of a variable, you can send a message to some other actor, you can create a new actor, or you become a different actor. Message is nothing but an event which you are signaling and providing the necessary data so that that particular event can be processed, whoever is interested and capable of processing that particular event. So as these actors go about doing their jobs, the system behavior increases. And our simulator out of the box provides an history, which is a triplet of I was in this particular state, I encountered this particular event, I took this particular action, and as a result, I went into some another state. So these kinds of triplets are produced for every actor in the system as a stream. And now, we want to check whether the digital twin is indeed a representation of the system. We know what is the system macro behavior. we express that macro behavior as patterns, and we look if those patterns are found on the history trace or not. So thus we establish that the digital twin is indeed a valid representation of the system. Fine, so you have got your digital twin, it has been established as a valid representation. What can you now do? Digital twin. What are the benefits that are accruable? So two broad benefits. First is the digital twin can be an excellent decision-making aid for domain experts. So what does that mean? So you have constructed a purposive digital twin, which essentially is a machine learned model of from the past data and an additional domain knowledge, which means the system has exhibited whatever it has exhibited, which is captured in the past data, but the system also has these other behaviors. That's what is the domain knowledge, which is what is captured in the digital twin. We validate the digital twin first with the manifest past, wherein simulation you check whether the digital twin is producing exactly the same output or ballpark similar output to what the system has produced. For the behaviors which are not yet manifest but are possible, we categorize those behaviors as good and bad patterns. And as I explained earlier, the simulator provides me a simulation trace as a history. We now provide pattern matching technology to ensure that all good patterns are seen over there and no bad pattern is seen. So thus a digital twin is validated. Now you can use this digital twin for whatever purpose that you want. Generally that purpose would be scenario playing. So you now want to know that if such and such situation, if my system is exposed, what should my response be? So you now set up that kind of a scenario and you run simulator, and you now interpret these simulation results so as to arrive at, okay, the results seem to be quite in the ballpark, I really don't need to do anything. But if the results are not expected, then I now need to do something, which means I now need to introduce some change into the system. So this arriving at a suitable intervention so as to achieve the desired result is a intellect intensive task, which is where the human expertise is called in. And the human experts are generally good at such tasks and they arrive at a suitable intervention. How do we know that this intervention is really going to work? You again use the digital twin as an in silico intervention validation aid. So you implement the intervention into the digital twin, subject the digital twin to the same scenario playing, examine the simulation results. If they are what is expected, what is desired, then the problem is solved. So thus the digital twin serves as an in silico experimentation aid and in silico intervention validation aid so as to support data-driven justification-backed decisions, of course, controlled by the human experts. Now, this signifies the amount of real-life experimentation that otherwise we would have done. And setting up of an experiment is intellect-intensive tasks, and it also costs significant time and effort. All that gets saved. Other benefit that accrues by using digital twin and reinforcement learning agent together is dynamic adaptation. So over here, the objective is the system needs to adapt to changes that are taking place in its environment. So over here, and even goals. So over here, the scenarios are my goals remain unchanged, but the environment into which I am operating is changing, or both the goals and environment are changing. So the solution over here is you use digital twin as an environment or an experience generator for the reinforcement learning agent to learn what is the best response for a particular change so as to meet the desired stated goals. So there is a training loop through which the reinforcement learning agent interacts with the digital twin and learns the right policy to cater to the changes that have been evinced. And once a reinforcement learning, the desired reinforcement learning agent is ready, it can now be used in two modes. First mode is a simple mode and offline mode, wherein digital twin trains the reinforcement learning agent, and the reinforcement learning agent is then plugged onto the system. Digital twin is not yet plugged onto the system. So the system and reinforcement learning agent then get into a feedback control loop so as to nudge the system or keep the system into the desired state. Now, this could either be done auto or it could be done via a human expert. That's the offline mode, very easy to implement. We also support an online mode, wherein the digital twin, the system, and the RL agent come together in a model reference adaptive architecture, a variant of which is you see onto the left-hand side. And over there, the reinforcement learning agent, while it is exploiting whatever it has learned by nudging the system in the right direction, is also capable of learning new things by continuing to interact with the digital twin. So that's reinforcement learning agent operates in an exploration, exploitation kind of a mode that can be configured. Thus, the reinforcement learning agent keeps on learning not only from interaction with the digital twin, but also from what the system has been producing. Now, there will be a case when the output of what the system is producing and what the digital twin is producing for the same input will start deviating significantly, or your goals themselves might change very significantly. In those cases, the digital twin now needs to be rehauled, and once the digital twin has been rehauled, again the same process can be adapted. So that's this architecture with realized through digital twin and reinforcement learning agent coming together in a variant of model reference adaptive control supports data-driven, justification-backed adaptation. This significantly reduces analysis and synthesis burden on the human experts because the reinforcement learning agent in the least is serving as a recommender system, or at best it is serving as a self-adaptive controller. So having accomplished these two, it is now possible to support digital twin enabled adaptive enterprise. Essentially, it is an interplay of two digital twins, the top one being exogenous digital twin, which is looking at the enterprise as a system, and the bottom one is digital twin for the systems of the enterprise. Now that's our past work. The top one is our new work, and we are these two digital twins need to interact so as to keep the enterprise always in a desired as well as internally consistent state. So that's of 60–70% over there. Now let me give you a flavor of how much of techniques have been used on ground or in real have on ground impact. So what is being listed down over there are 4 spaces where we see these ideas to have a very good impact. The first is that of business systems, or let's call it as a information only space. Second is cyber physical systems. Over there also we are focusing really onto the information aspects of the cyber physical, not onto the physical aspects of the systems themselves. I'll come to that later. Third is the societal systems, like a city, and you want to control a pandemic in a city. So I have taken a use case each from these 3 spaces just to give a flavor of utility and efficacy of these ideas in practice. The 4th space, that of biological systems, is something which we have just now started work, and I would rather like to talk about it only after having in that space. So the illustration 1, this comes from the cyber physical system. The problem is improving the throughput of a sorting terminal for a postal in. So what is the problem? The problem is how to increase the throughput of a sorter. Now, what is a sorter? Sorter is a very complex cyber-physical system wherein you have finite in feeds from which the where the packets arrive, and then there are escalators which take those packets onto the sorter belt. Sorter belt is equipped with scanners and it has designated delivery zones. For each delivery zone, there is a chute of a different kind depending upon the nature of the packet. And there is a robotic arm in front of the chute, so that when the right packet meant for that particular zone comes at the chute, the robotic arm just pushes the packet into the chute. So there are n kinds of chutes, and there are n numbers of each of these chutes that are necessary and sufficient to cater to a particular workload. As the chutes get filled, they are emptied using people. So if this particular contraption needs to work at topmost in an optimal manner, we just need to do three things well. We should remove the packets from the belt as soon as possible. We should empty the chutes as fast as possible, and no packet should stay unclaimed on the sorter, because any packet which stays unclaimed for whatever reasons, one now needs to do everything manually, which is a very cost-intensive process. So what is the current practice? Current practice is based upon the previous n shifts. We use statistical means to arrive at a workload for the n+1th shift. And for that particular workload, again, based upon what has worked in the past, people have some strategies that, okay, if this is the kind of a workload, then I will be needing this kind of my sorter, and for each chute I'm going to assign so many people which will be emptying the chutes, and then these people need to walk from the chute to the delivery zone, place the packet, etc., etc. And in case something goes wrong, and it will go wrong, because the real workload is never going to be a perfect match of the predicted workload, then one now needs to do exception handling, wherein the shift manager now needs to say that, okay, take 2 people out from this particular chute and send one guy to some other chute and send the other guy to some other chute, things like that. This happens largely in an ad hoc manner, which is not what which is not the best way to have a maximal throughput. So the desired thing is, I want optimal throughput, I want optimized resource utilization, and I want an adaptive and efficient operation of my sorter. So how did we go about? How did we deliver that? So we use experimentation capability of a digital twin. So we created a simulated digital twin for that entire sorting, wherein the sorter, the conveyor belt, the various zones, the chutes, the people, escalators, scanners, everything is exists as an actor which has well-defined behavior, and these actors exchange information with each other. And we subject this particular digital twin to the predicted workload. And we look at the output of the simulator. And that output we then examine for what is the average time for a package to the chute, what is the average chute clearing time, are there any unassigned packages or unclaimed packages left onto the sorter. During this process, whatever strategy I had of assigning people to chutes, did I need to do any alterations, point-wise alterations to those particular strategy? How many such interventions and of what kind, so on and so forth. So now an expert can look at the simulated output and take corrective actions, whether whatever was suggested as the sorter configuration, is it really the right sorter configuration, or one needs slightly better configuration? Meaning, should I now have, instead of 3 times if a package goes unclaimed, should it now be dumped into the manual chute, or should I give it one more round for it to be kept? So all such strategies, plus the resource allocation strategies for how many people to which chute, for what time epoch, all such things can now be simulated so as to arrive at a better strategy a priori. So this improves the throughput. This improved the throughput significantly, and more importantly, as the simulator was recording what was taking place, this corrective actions, etc., also get recorded, and they can now be used using a machine learning based algorithms so as to improve the predicted workload. So these things in the orange is something which we have just now started, or rather it has not yet been proven on ground. Everything else has been proven on ground. So just to give you the results of that, as you can see down below, if you change the resource allocation of for the 4 chutes from 3334 to 2223, so thus you are now using less number of resources, and you are still able to achieve maximal utilization of the chute, meaning the chute is never getting overflown. Red means no yellow means the more red means better. Okay, so that's what we did to demonstrate efficacy for a cyber physical space. Second thing I'm going to use is to illustrate the efficacy in a information. So this is optimizing the customer lifetime value for a telco in US. So over here, the problem to be stated rather bluntly is I want to maximize the revenue from the customer while minimizing the cost of servicing the customer. That's essentially the problem. So the telco space essentially is a play between these 3 subspaces: customers, who are the customers that I have, who are the customers that I would like to have, who are the customers that I definitely don't want to have, but I do have. Third, second space is that of the products. These are the products that I have. These are the products that I should be having, so that I will be able to get the kind of customers that I want. And these are the products that I should retire because they are not fetching, they are not resonating well with the customers. The third phase is my customer care policies, processes, etc. So I would like to keep the customers happy, but I would like to get maximal output by keeping them just the right level happy. So the kind of problem posed to us were the 3, as you can see out over there, from the head of the sales, head of the customer care, and head of the products. Today, these problems are solved in silos. So the head of customer care figures out what is the best way to optimize his support function by just looking at the customer care aspects. The products guy just looks at the whatever products that it has and whatever products are needed in the light of the information provided by the marketing research group. And the customer head of sales relies extensively on the current array of products or current bouquet of products and the information provided by the market research team. So they arrive at solutions in silos, and together these solutions may not work out more as effectively as they want, because the ramifications of these local actions onto the other 2 spaces, there is just no way to figure that thing out. So as a result, the overall decision making, though it ends up being a good decision making, is a series of such pushes and nudges that the management needs to take so as to arrive at the right state. And this is a highly dynamic space. I was amazed to know that most of these companies actually launch a product every week, and the cost of a launch of a product is in several tens of millions. And if they don't do well on the product launch, on cost terms and effectiveness terms, then there is amount of revenue, as well as both it affects top line and the bottom line. So to solve this particular problem for a US-based telco, again we used in silico experimentation capability of the digital twin. So we constructed a digital twin for wherein every single customer type is modeled as an actor type. Every single product type, every single customer care process is modeled digitally in the form of a digital twin. And that particular such a digital twin can now be subjected to a product launch plan that you have come up with, and you now see the output of the simulator. And that particular output, the domain expert will examine for key KPIs, like what is the revenue that I am getting from customers, what is the cost for servicing each of these customers, so on and so forth. And in the light of that, now the domain expert is able to figure out what changes need to be made into the product bundles, wherein a product actually is a selection of several capabilities, and you need to change that selection so that it fits better the customer's perceived needs. So that kind of what will work well to whom, that kind of a sensitivity analysis for a product bundled now can be played in silico. Similarly, the which customers to target for which particular product, again that kind of analysis can be played in silico. Similarly for your customer care processes. So thus this leads sales, head of the products, head of the customer care together to arrive at strategies which are harmonious and lead to a much better global result. A sample result for which our digital twin was used. Over here, the focus was on reducing the customer churn normal epoch. So what you see on top are the costs. So about 50 million USD was the cost impact, and it was hurting them 15% of the overall contact center revenues. So we looked at 20,000 customers, created a digital twin wherein each customer had about 130 attributes and about 78 attributes per product. And then we subjected that digital twin to various what-if analysis based upon the desired changes in the billing process, resource strategies, so on and so forth. And the net result was we were able to reduce the churn significantly, which led to 47 million savings per month. And the number of calls that were billing related also reduced by 4 to 6%, which also led to 10% of upsell to an existing customers. So the overall NPS number increased significantly. So I think I have about 5 to 10 minutes. So let me go over use of digital twin for societal systems. I think a problem which almost everyone will be able to resonate rather well. It's digital twin for predicting and controlling COVID-19 spread in Pune. So here is the problem. I think almost everybody is now very well versed with the SEIR models. It's a compartmentalized model. It says that how much of the population is susceptible for COVID, everybody is susceptible. Then how much of that population is now exposed to the virus means coming in contact with someone who is infected. From that exposed, how many have now got severely infected, and how many have recovered, and how many were unlucky not to have made it. So these progressions essentially are a function of various parameters, of which the exposed to infected and infected to removed parameters are essentially virus characteristics. They are reasonably understood and they are fairly universal. The key is susceptible to exposed strategy. So that is a function of the number of proximal contacts, the proximal contact duration, and the virus characteristics. The proximal contacts itself is a function of people movement and population density. And also it is a function of whether the transmission is human to human, aerosol, or human to surface to human, that kind of a thing. So today, the way to figure out S to E transition essentially is based on observations in some other geography or in some other population, and use those coefficients over here, but because the susceptibility to exposed transition is demography and place dependent, and in a heterogeneous country like us, where these parameters vary highly significantly, the coefficients that are derived from the observations for a different demography and different place characteristics cannot be reused for a different demography. And that's essentially the problem. That's where all these aggregated models based upon these compartments essentially fail. And if you have a wide variety of demography and place characteristics, the strategies that you would need to control the spread will also be locality specific. And that's where the current state of the aggregated models is found. What we did, no prizes for guessing, is we constructed a digital twin of the locality. And so over here, we essentially captured 4 dimensions, the demographic dimensions. For that population, the age, gender, comorbidity, means are they vulnerable to, are they already patient of chronic pulmonary disorders, or diabetic, or hypertension. We consider only 3 comorbidities. What are their professions? What do they do in a typical working day, etc., etc. That's the demographic aspect. On the virus characteristic aspect, we capture the transmissibility, human to human, human to surface, surface to human dimensions. On the place dimension, movement dimension, we captured the place archetypes like school, colleges, offices, factories, small shops, malls, etc., etc. And what are the typical movements and what is the density of people at a given point in time into that, so that it will have a good idea, we will get a good idea of the contacts and the proximity of the contacts. And on the intervention dimensions, factors pertaining, parameters that control the S to E essentially. So like lockdown strategies, lockdown relaxation strategies, use of masks, social distancing, whom to test when, etc., etc. So essentially, we created a digital twin for a particular locality, locality types where this is a largely residential area for well-to-do people. This is a residential area, this is the slum. This is largely a shopping district, but small to medium, no malls, single owner shops, etc., etc., etc. And using such, for constructing a digital twin for such localities, we considered people types, mobility types, and place types as explained earlier. We then defined actors necessary and sufficient to cover these types. And now we created a digital twin for a particular locality using appropriate actor type instances. With such locality specific digital twins, we now define a digital twin for a ward. And having done that, then we used it in the following. So we then subjected this particular digital twin for a time epoch. So essentially what we did was we inserted, I'll come to that later. And as these people go about doing their jobs in a totally unrestricted or whatever movement restricted manner, we looked at the simulated output. And that simulated output was examined for virus spread, load on hospitals, quarantining load, and load on testing. And depending upon that output, now we could now tweak the digital twin for, okay, what happens if I restrict movement for these kinds of, what if I restrict these kinds of movement? What if I close down these kinds of places? What if I now include these people for testing, etc., etc. And thus, it helped us arrive at appropriate movement and testing related strategies through scenario play. So how did we validate this digital twin? So we first of all constructed a digital twin for a prototypical ward. From the PNC, we had the actual data available about that ward. But generally wards are very large, about 2.5 lakh people, and all that we had was a laptop to do the simulations. So we created a sample of the population of the ward using stratified sampling techniques. And we then inserted an asymptomatic person on some day in the past. And then we simulated this particular digital twin with no movement restrictions till the lockdown was clamped and appropriate restrictions post lockdown state. And we did this till a particular date and tracked just the number of deaths that were reported by the PNC and the deaths that were predicted by our digital twin. Why deaths? Because for any other matter, any other parameter like number of people mildly infected, number of people severely infected, there are, we don't know, because the testing is not extensive, plus people are afraid. Some people, even if they have the symptoms, they won't go to the hospital, so on and so forth. So we felt it is not right to rely on those dimensions, but deaths nobody can fake, and we are assuming that whatever was reported was correct. So what you see over here is the numbers of deaths that were projected by our model, which is 15, and our model is 1/8 sample of the actual. So if you just use simple projection, it would be 120 are the deaths that we are predicting, and the actual deaths were 124. So that kind of gave us a confidence that our model is kind of reasonable representation of the reality. We used it for various experiments. The first experiment was, is the lockdown, was it really required? What if we hadn't locked down? So here are the figures with lockdown and without lockdown for Sahakar Nagar ward in Pune up to May 4. So had there been no lockdown, the deaths would have been at least 5 times more. And this is just for one ward. So you can imagine the situation would have been really quite bad if there was no. And because we have such a fine-grained model, we are able to actually say who are the ones who are dying. So are they young? Are they senior? Do they have certain comorbidities? So we are able to predict even those specific details, and they seem to match with what is there with the data that PNC has. The second experimentation which we conducted was when the lockdown was relaxed for certain zones, for certain wards in Pune on 4. So we suggested these 9 criteria. Those criteria themselves were arrived at by using sensitivity analysis. And so as you can see, the baseline is everything is relaxed, and then there are some variations over this baseline. And then there is one composite kind of a guideline wherein you are saying that you relax for a few days, clamp for a few days, that kind of a thing. So see in front of you are the numbers for the Bhawanipet ward of Pune. Now Bhawanipet is a high population density marketplace, lot many people go over there, lot many slums, lower medium income group people kind of a ward. So over here what you see is if the lockdown, no matter what strategy you are using, there is going to be a significant rise in the number of positive cases. So just relaxation or some variant of relaxation is not going to work. But if you relax, contract, experiment number 5, that seems to give you the best results. Now, when we did something similar for the other 2 wards, the Sahakar Nagar ward and the Nagar Road ward, the results were quite different. So over there, the experiment number 2, or the variation number, intervention number 2 seemed to work the best. And here is what you see as the number of loads on hospitals. Again, experiment number 5, relax, contract, seems to work best. So the key takeaways were, it kind of proved that you cannot be having the same strategy work equally well for different kinds of wards. It is a function of people, movements, and population density. Different wards have different characteristics, so different interventions are required for different wards. Latest experiment which led to the recommendations that Pune Municipal Corporation issued on 19th of May. So over here, we added the testing dimension. The testing dimension is very interesting. What you really need to figure out is whom to test, at what level to test, and when to test. Because of the when is important, because of the virus characteristics. It takes so much time to incubate, etc., etc., etc. So over here, what we are suggesting is those who are severely infected, you please compute through contact tracing who all have come in contact with those severely infected people for last how many days. We are suggesting that just don't focus on severely infected. Also take some percentage of those who are not yet infected, asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic people. Take some percentage and compute the through contact tracing who are the people with whom who have come in contact with such people, and from this pool that now you have, you now subject it to some filters who can then be selected. Now, should you focus only on people who are having comorbidities or seniors, or should you focus on young people, etc.? So those are the strategies which you would like to arrive at. And you also want to decide what kind of a test, what level of a testing to do for which person, depending upon the age, comorbidities, etc., etc., etc. So over here, the control variables are pertaining to the movement, and the observable variables are virus spread, load on hospitals, and the load on institutional quarantines. And we used digital twin as a in silico aid to carry out these. And what through such sensitivity analysis, we arrived at 3 movement-related candidate interventions. Intervention 1, 2, 3. I don't have too much of time, so let me not read them out. Essentially, it is telling what can be open for how long, and how to ensure that there is not too much of overcrowding at that particular place at any given point in time. That was guiding these interventions. And here is a sample result of which strategy of intervention and testing works well for which particular ward. So as you can see over here, the intervention 1 with 40% of the mild and asymptomatic patient to be considered for computing the testable pool through contact tracing. That strategy seems to work the best. And of course, there is huge amount of data. As you can see that this is a very rich data, rich digital twin. So we looked at simulation results and came up with specific recommendations. So this was the testing related recommendation and was the movement related recommendation. So we translated that into normal English and submitted to the Pune Municipal Commissioner. This work is being done under the aegis of the Pune Knowledge Cluster in collaboration with Prayas, which is an NGO in health space. And most of our recommendations, since they were data backed, and that data PMC Commissioner felt it is quite in tune with the data that they have, most of our recommendations were accepted and they find a place in the order that was released on 19th May. I think that's about it. I have given you a fair view of the various kinds of problems where this idea of a digital twin and reinforcement learning, either individually or together, can be used. And to summarize, I would say that future is all about large, complex, dynamic systems of systems, where dynamic adaptation in face of uncertainty is the key need. Digital twin and reinforcement learning seems to offer a promising line of attack. We have developed the core technology, but a lot needs to be done. So with that, I'll stop and take questions. I'm sorry, I have extended by about 10 minutes.
Thank you, Vinay. And I have a few questions already from the attendees. Since we are over time, I'll just pick one or two for your attention, Vinay. First is from Amber Gadkari. Essentially, the question is that COVID-19 cases in Pune are very impressive case study of application of digital twins. What is the underlying modeling tool framework used here? Is it custom built or is it any open source available? Is an open source version available? How much time was taken to create these models, training and validating them?
Yeah. Thanks, Amber. What we have done is we have used a language which is based on actor model of computation. That language itself is an open source. It's available publicly. I can provide the URL to you. But what we have done is we have also created a Java version of that language for ease of consumption within my organization. So it's the Java version which was used to implement the digital twin. And as regards the second question, how much time it took, the simple answer is it took us about, we have been working on it for last 4 weeks, but those have been extremely loaded days. We have been working something like 16 to 18 days a week, 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, because we are also doing our normal TCS related work. So I think that should give you a fair bit of idea that if you have enough, if you have the right kind of people on board, like demographic experts, then constructing a model per se won't take too much of a time.
Second question is from user ID, I think it's not a name, Invisha. Digital twin model, is it reusable and available for other industrial academic fraternity, or is it very specific TCS IP?
Okay. As it must be quite apparent to you that essentially we are technology people, and especially my group is all about languages and language engineering. So for us, what we have created is a language which will help you construct purposive digital twins. And that's where we stop actually. We give a language, we give a compiler, in this case, simulator for that language, and then say, you write your own programs. So you create your own digital twins. So in that sense, the technology is generic. What I demonstrated are specific digital twins which were constructed in order to solve a specific problem on ground.
how are the models validated with, with real life?
Yeah, okay. So two ways to validate the models. I will answer the question in general. So first, as I said, digital twin essentially comprises of machine learned model, means there is a past data from which I am learning it, and there is something which I know that it has not yet manifest, but it could happen. So that's all is going into the digital twin. So you can use the past data as a validation aid to validate that part which should happen. And the data and for the behaviors that you know are there in my system but that are not yet manifest, we use simulations, and a domain expert either looks at the values and says, yeah, I think these values seem to hold true, or we give a pattern matching technology wherein you specify the desired behavior as a set of patterns, good and bad, and we use those patterns to test onto the examine the simulation output in with the lens of those good and bad patterns to tell you whether it is indeed holding or not.
And I guess the last question from Dr. Badeshia, is a digital twin the same as a simulation? I see no difference. So
actually, digital twin is something that is getting simulated. So in a sense, if you say that is digital twin nothing but a simulatable model, you are absolutely correct. It is nothing but a simulatable model. No, but the question is, most of the places where we are using simulatable models quite well are the places where it is possible to specify the system in mathematical terms because the system holds to the laws of the nature. But over here, we are talking about spaces wherein there are no such laws. And therefore, you need a means to express what that system is in a language which is intuitive and yet machine processable. And therefore, the actor model of computation, and therefore a model which is a simulatable model, but it is not a mathematical representation in the truest sense.
Thanks, Vinay. There were several other questions, but in the interest of time, let me hand back to Colonel Ryan.
Thank you. I just copy down all those questions, and if someone could send me an email, my email address is or vinay.vkulkarni@tcs.com. I'll definitely get back to you.
A big thank you to all our esteemed speakers and to our fellows, young associates and other invitees who have been part of this first webinar of ours. Only thing before we part, just wanted to share the information about our next webinar which is going to take place, and the details are flashed on your screens for your kind information. Of course, a formal invite for same will follow through. The second talk is, the date is 6th of June, 11 to 1 p.m. And the topic is, does hydrogen have a role in India's energy strategy? The expert panelists will be Dr. Ranjit Pai, Dr. SSV Ramkumar, and Dr. R.R. Sonde, and the session will be moderated by Mr. M.V. Kotwal. All these panelists are and the moderator are eminent fellows, and it will be an honor to have them on board for this second talk. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us, and see you on 6th of June between 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.